Greetings, all. We have finally arrived at VBT, verse 100, Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, verse 100, after almost 2 years. So we're not quite 2/3 of the way through the text, but verse 100 feels like a milestone. And it's a beautiful verse. It's an interesting verse. I'm going to paste it here in the chat window. So yeah, we're in the contemplation or contemplative practices section of the text, which has maybe 10 more verses to go. And so this is what would later be called by Abhinavagupta Shakta Upaya, the method, the spiritual method of contemplating and refining your understanding of the nature of reality so that your mind becomes a vehicle and a vessel and a touchstone for the teachings and for truth rather than a confused mess or whatever else it might be. Okay. So this process is called vikalpa samskara, and that means purification and refinement of your understanding of sort of your mental representation of reality. Right, so what we might say is our story or beliefs about reality are, by and large, not well aligned with reality itself. So cultivating, contemplating, and internalizing the spiritual teachings is a process of dislodging the thought constructs and beliefs that aren't well aligned with the nature of reality and making your mind much better aligned and ultimately, ideally, perfectly aligned with the nature of reality. And there's very clear signs of that, because it's not all belief systems are created equal. And, people have a value these days of relativism. It's everyone can believe what they like. All belief systems are valid. Yes and no, because some offer teachings that create this alignment that I'm talking about. And there's alignment because there's a radically different experience than the one you had before of life and reality. Clarity, absolutely crystal clarity, is what you develop with internalizing these teachings and taking them to a very deep level, but also harmony, ease and flow in life, natural harmony with the rhythms and patterns of life with other beings, harmony with nature, harmony with humans, harmony with yourself. That is evidence that you have successfully internalized teachings that have caused you to recalibrate your understanding of the nature of reality, right? Because this should just make sense to you. Having thoughts or thought constructs or beliefs that don't align with the nature of reality will continually bring you into conflict and disharmony, right? So that's the purpose then of the practice of vikalpa samskara is, using the word samskara in a very different sense here, by the way, purification and refinement of your understanding, your vikalpa. So that's the purpose of these contemplative practices. They ideally become direct experience, but you get to the direct experience in this particular method through this refined contemplation of the teaching, whereas you get to direct experience in other methods by other means, non-conceptual means, shambhava upaya, and bodily means, including the energy body, anava upaya. Okay, so here's the verse. Verse 100. And it's been about 90 of these videos to reach verse 100, because early on we had more than one verse per video. Ciddharmā sarvadeheṣu viśeṣo nāsti kutracit ataśca tanmayaṃ sarvaṃ bhāvayan bhavajij janaḥ. The One who has awareness as his fundamental attribute exists in all bodies. and awareness as such is the same in all beings. Thus, a person who contemplates everything as having that divine nature overcomes the false appearances of mundane existence. Okay, so let's break that down. I want to mention, oftentimes in the Sanskrit, there is no gendered pronoun at all, but when we translate into English, we need a pronoun, and we don't yet have a universally agreed upon gender neutral pronoun, so it's a feature of translation. So I said his, but there's no actual gendered pronoun in the Sanskrit. But you need a possessive pronoun there, and so the English pronouns are all possessive, and it's weird to say its. The English possessive pronouns are all gendered. It's weird to say its because we're talking about a being. We're talking about consciousness as being, not as some abstract principle separate from beings. So we have just a translation problem there. Anyway, ciddharmā, sarvadeheṣu. The one, here implying something like God or universal consciousness, the one who has awareness as his or its fundamental attribute, exists in all bodies. So it's a way of saying there's one consciousness in all bodies. Okay? That the power of consciousness by which all conscious beings are conscious is universal. So that's why it makes sense to talk about it as one being, as it were, looking out through 7.7 billion pairs of eyes, or more if we're including some other animals as being sentient. Doesn't matter, but one being looking out at the universe that is ultimately its own body through countless billions of pairs of eyes. Okay, so this is important because some traditions do not teach this. Not all traditions teach the same thing as fundamental truth. Some traditions say that at the level of essence nature we're different, but the Indian tradition does not. Whether it's Tantra or even classical yoga of Patanjali teaches at the level of essence nature, soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, we are all the same and we are all one. Tantra teaches. Patanjali doesn't say that, but he does say we're all the same. He said on the soul level we're all exactly the same. So why is this hard to understand? Because most people, there's some confusion between mind and consciousness. Certainly in the entire Western philosophical tradition, there's no clear delineation or distinction between mind and consciousness, okay? And there's a confusion of what's called Umwelt with consciousness. So Umwelt is the range of phenomena that a given embodied consciousness can perceive. So, for example, we're all familiar with this. Dogs can hear higher tones with their ears than we can hear, and with their brains, right? Cats can see a little bit into the infrared. We cannot, right? We have this certain range of electromagnetic radiation that we can perceive. So light, of course, is just electromagnetic radiation. So it's all one spectrum from gamma rays to radio waves. There's something past that, but anyway, that's the spectrum, and it depends on frequency and amplitude of waves, whether they are gamma rays, X-rays, visible light, microwaves, infrared, X-rays, radio waves. So a lot of people still don't understand this, by the way. It's kind of odd that our education system has failed in this respect. A lot of people don't understand that it's all one spectrum, that there's no intrinsic difference between, say, X-rays and microwaves and light, visible light, other than amplitude and frequency of the energy, right? But anyway, the point is, I was making an analogy. that some beings perceive this part of the spectrum, some beings perceive that part of the spectrum of light, of sound, and so on. So the range of possible phenomena that a conscious entity can perceive is its Umwelt. Okay? So humans have some pretty substantial Umwelt, but way less than some other possible beings, whether there's aliens or whatever, whether there's devas, this is sort of mythological territory, but certainly many ancient Indians believed that devas were literally existing beings without physical bodies. They have light bodies, and their Umwelt is much larger. They can see much more of the spectrum. They can hear, things we can't hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, without getting speculative, we know that there are Umwelts larger than ours and ones that are smaller than ours. And the example that's sometimes given in the literature is like a certain kind of tick can only perceive the presence or absence of butyric acid and the presence of or absence of heat. That's its entire Umwelt. That's all it can perceive. Butyric acid or its lack, and heat or its lack. So that's a very, very, very narrow world compared to ours. But here's the main point, we must not confuse Umwelt with consciousness. Consciousness is the power by which anything is known. So consciousness, however small the Umwelt, like that tick, or however large, like the Umwelt of a deva or a theoretical alien, it's still one singular power of consciousness by which those phenomena are known. So consciousness is the power to know anything at all, the power to have experience of any kind at all. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that these lower life forms are not conscious, that they're not actually aware that their physical organisms, like the tick, can measure these two phenomena, but they may not be having a conscious experience. So this is something very much under debate currently. It's one of the biggest questions in neuroscience. When do the lights come on? How complex does a creature need to be to have an actual experience, meaning to say there's something it is like to be that creature, right? And this is a very important question, because if in certain simpler life forms, if there's nothing it's like to be them, if they're not having conscious experience, but just executing a biological program with no experience associated with it, then obviously we can't harm those beings in any sense that's meaningful to us. We can't cause them pain. If they have no experience at all, they can't experience pain. So it would be nice to know which beings we're causing pain to and which we're not. And it's, by the way, most neuroscientists currently agree that, pigs and cows are conscious creatures, that they are having experience, probably. Very difficult to know this for sure. And that we can harm them, and we do cause them pain, and that's a moral problem. Very, very beautifully addressed by Yuval Harari in I believe it was in *Sapiens*. Might have been, yeah, I think it was in *Sapiens*. This sort of moral problem that humanity has as a whole just entirely failed to grapple with. But anyway, so we don't know when the lights come on. We don't know what level of complexity biologically is necessary for consciousness. But whenever consciousness is present, it is consciousness. It's not differentiated because it's not differentiatable. Right? It's the simple fact of having experience. It's the simple fact that there's something it's like to be you or this creature, whatever creature. So consciousness is this teaching they're giving is actually, totally compatible with our most sophisticated understandings of consciousness and neuroscience. Consciousness is one and the same in all beings. And so there's of course a theological spiritual doctrine here not found in neuroscience that we can therefore conclude that there is only one being, there is only one consciousness. Consciousness having the same nature, staring out through countless billions of pairs of eyes. And so you see we do confuse consciousness with the mind, though, because the mind is what we're looking through. The mind is part of the body. The mind is part of the brain, part of the body, right? So this is the vehicle that consciousness is looking through. And the mind, the nature of that person's mind and body certainly influences the types of conscious experiences they're able to have. In other words, it influences the contents of consciousness, but it does not influence consciousness per se. This is a mystery science has not been able to explain so far, right? And a few people have postulated wild theories, like, Roger Penrose has theorized, could consciousness have a basis in what was the phrase he used? Quantum foam, I think. The very most fundamental level of quantized phenomena. And so this is not something I understand, right? It's a very difficult theory by a very advanced physicist. But yeah, he's saying that consciousness could have a basis that's not in the organic matter of the physical brain, but in the quantum field itself. This would, of course, very well fit in with tantric philosophy. But the point here is, regardless of that, consciousness is not conditioned by its contents. It's very important to understand that. So you are consciousness looking through a body-mind. The configuration of your body-mind and its predilections and its traumas and its, samskaras and likes and dislikes, that influences what it is that you experience, this as opposed to that. It influences the contents of consciousness. It does not influence or condition consciousness itself. And that's why we give this teaching, first given in the Gita and then abundantly in Tantra. There's this aspect of your being, consciousness itself, which is unwounded and unwoundable, which is not traumatized and not traumatizable, which is not conditioned by its contents. So if you can learn to abide in that level of your being, you realize a freedom previously unknown to you, because you're accessing and feeling and experiencing and abiding in this aspect of you which is not broken or wounded or any of those things that the body-mind can be or can subjectively seem to be. So that's important. Okay, so ciddharmā, sarvadeheṣu. And by the way, the word dharma here is a totally different meaning from what you're used to with the word dharma. Here it means quality or attribute. And this usage is very common in Buddhist sources, also found in Shaiva sources. The usage of the word dharma in this very different sense to mean quality or attribute. Okay? So ciddharmā, the one who has awareness or consciousness as its attribute or fundamental attribute. Sarvadeheṣu exists in all beings. Viśeṣo, nāsti, kutracit. And it is the same in all beings. So I already commented on that. There's not different types of consciousness. There's different types of conscious experience. Those are variations in the contents of consciousness. So these people who are talking about attaining a higher plane of consciousness, very common phrase in New Age and New Age influenced environments, spiritual communities. From the point of view of this tradition, that's nonsense. Consciousness doesn't change. Consciousness is not, higher or lower. It's just consciousness. And it has very, very subtle qualities that can only be discovered through abiding in it, and qualities that most people find very beautiful and liberating, like tranquility and peace and clarity and a propensity to spontaneous joy and so on and so forth. So there are not different types of consciousness. There's only different types of experience, that is to say, contents of consciousness. I can't stress enough how important this is. Okay. Okay. Then he says, ataśca tanmayaṃ sarvaṃ. A person who contemplates everything as having that nature, that divine nature, that nature fundamental consciousness being the same in all beings. Such a person who contemplates this in depth and realizes its truth overcomes bhava. Here, bhava with a short a means worldliness or worldly experience or mundane existence or the ocean of samsara, bhavasagara. It's a way of saying you become awakened, because to be awakened is metaphorically often described as crossing to the farther shore, crossing over this ocean of samsara or of worldliness to the farther shore of awakening. Okay, so the person who contemplates everything as having that nature, that the nature of there being one universal consciousness in all beings, overcomes the false appearances of mundane existence. So this might be, as simple as looking into the eyes, deeply looking into the eyes of living creatures, humans and other complex animals, and seeing, recognizing, not just imagining ideally, but recognizing it's the one. It's the one looking back at you. And you are that one too. Right? We get a glimpse of this with the eyes of little babies often. You can look in the eyes of a baby, depending on kind of where you're at in that moment, but you can look in the eyes of a baby and it feels as if the universe is looking back at you, like the infinite or something. And that's exactly what's looking out of your eyes. It's just that you've become identified with body and mind and memory and all these features that are contents of consciousness. They are not consciousness. So you've gotten distracted, that's all. You've gotten distracted in a way that a baby hasn't yet had a chance to be, in a sense. One of my teachers puts it this way: there's nothing but what's looking out of your eyes right now. So looking in the eyes of a baby or any conscious creature, you can actually see it, you can glimpse it in anyone's eyes if you're looking deeply enough. And they could be a totally messed up person. Still, it's the one looking through that messed up body mind, and it's the same one in you. So it's nice to cultivate, this is actually quite an important point. Don't imagine, that you can only experience this in the eyes of an innocent baby. No, you can experience it with looking into the eyes of any conscious creature. Because whatever condition their body mind is in, which influences the range of possible experiences they can have, it's still the one having those experiences. It's the one looking out of their eyes. It's the one that's looking out of your eyes. And it seeks to meet itself in a sense. There's something deeply nourishing about seeing the one looking through someone else's eyes and recognizing that in the deepest possible sense, that's you too. If you really, really recognize and realize that one, there's no birth, there's no death. The one is eternal. It's unborn and undying. And it's the one looking through all the eyes. Contemplate that, will you? It's a practice. You're not supposed to think about it. You contemplate, you take it deep inside, and then you seek to recognize it in real life, in everyday life, not just in your mind world of contemplated ideas. Okay, that's it. VBT verse 100. And we'll continue. Thank you for being on this journey. Thank you especially and most of all to the patrons whose generous support on Patreon has made this VBT series possible, going on 2 years now, more than 90 videos, and it'll be more, all made possible by the patrons on Patreon, whose support allowed me to finally realize my dream of offering lots of content for free. And so I also very much appreciate patrons that you're not too demanding. Like, you don't like say, give us more content for our donations. You're very accepting of sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And that allows me to, be of service to the whole community, not just the patrons. So the patrons make it possible for many more people to receive the teachings. If you want to become one, join us on patreon.com. You do get access to teachings only there that are nowhere else. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much temptation to join, would there? But also, it's just about supporting. So, 240 some patrons. Thank you for making the VBT series possible. We reached verse 100 and more to come. Om.